Focaccia is one of my favorite things to make and one of my family's favorite things to eat, and mainly because it's sort of like a lazy man sourdough. And I love focaccia for people who are just getting into sourdough and just learning about how to make it, because it's sort of like this foolproof way of learning the process, but then not having to worry about getting gummy flat bread coming out of the oven, because this works kind of no matter what. So it's one of those things that we're gonna build some structure at the beginning of the process, but then you can kind of forget about it on your counter and it will still work. And I love that about this because it still gives you this beautiful, fluffy, fully fermented product, but you don't have to babysit it quite as much. And it's not as diligent when you're shaping it and proofing it and doing all the things. So we're gonna show you kind of how we put it together. The other thing I really like about sourdough focaccia is you can use discard instead of making a leaven. So it's one of those things that it's like, you know, a Friday night and you're thinking, oh, I really want to have focaccia bread for tomorrow. You can throw it together, build some structure, leave it on the counter for the night, and you can make it the next day. And so it's less premeditated than making sourdough bread because you don't have to worry about this being quite as active as you do. I like to use a thicker discard, but you can pull your discard out of the fridge, toss it in this recipe, build some structure, and kind of leave it to ferment on its own, and you'll have beautiful focaccia. It's still only your flour, water, salt, and your sourdough component. So it's still only our few ingredients in the bowl. It's still a fully fermented product, and it's way less work than making sourdough bread, and it's just a little bit less time consuming. It's not one of those things that you have to really time out. You don't have to come back to it every half an hour or an hour and coil fold, although I like to do that if I happen to be home. This is a great one for those of you who are new to sourdough and maybe having some fails with your sourdough bread. Try some focaccia instead. The other thing I love about this type of recipe is we aren't going to do an autolaise, so we're just putting all the ingredients in the bowl at the same time. So we're going to start with our water. We're going to do 350 grams of water. And then we're gonna take our discard. So I just pulled this out of the fridge. There's more than we need in here, but we're gonna take about 150 grams of discard. So that's actually about 170. So that's fine. Let's whisk that up. So putting more in there than what the recipe calls for is just essentially gonna give it a little more activity, which is obviously great. So we're gonna do 500 grams of flour. And then before I mix that together, I'm gonna add in our salt. So we just have a gray salt. Just like sourdough bread, this part's pretty crucial because you're building the gluten at the beginning. And if you don't build the gluten at the beginning, you can really never get that back. So you can do lots of coil folds and build the gluten as it starts to ferment. But to build gluten before, like to develop all the gluten before it starts to ferment, you only have one shot at that. So if you have a mixer with a dough hook, you're just going to turn it on and leave it on a medium, kind of medium speed, and just sort of let it kind of do its thing. It's gonna start to look like this, and you're gonna leave it to do that until it starts to get really nice and stretchy. We don't have that. Well, I do, but I didn't bring it out today. So I'm gonna show you kind of how I build structure with my hands. So we're just gonna take it and we're gonna just kind of shake the dough and start to stretch it and fold it over. It's gonna be shaggy and it's gonna be sticky, and that's all right. And we can start to kind of use it to spin it around with our hands like this. And basically what you're doing is you're just really developing that gluten. We can even kind of tuck it under it as a wet knead if you want to do that too. And this is obviously, it's an arm workout. So if you're somebody that this is difficult for, using a mixer can be really helpful. Okay, so we're just mixing up, and what I'll probably do is I'll come back to this dough in half an hour and I'll knead it, I'll tidy it up. So I'll make it a little bit neater. Right now it's shaggy and it's kind of messy. So we'll coil it up, make it neater, and then really at that point you can just basically leave it. So we're gonna cover this up and leave it for a bit, and I'll come back to it. So this has been about half hour. As you can see, it's pretty shaggy, but I'm gonna show you what happens after it sits for so long. See how it starts to get really stretchy? So I could technically have just left this and then formed it into my focaccia later on. But what I like to do is if I'm home after half an hour, I like to kind of come in here and just tidy it up. So on my Instagram, I've showed wet kneading lots of different times. And basically with focaccia, you're just going to kind of do this, maybe a couple slap folds, just to build some extra structure, again, as the fermentation is just getting started. And what that does is once you've built that structure inside the dough, then that's it, you're good. With focaccia, you don't really have to come back and do anything else after this. So we're just going to kind of leave that. I'm gonna be here for the day, so I might pop back in and out and coil fold this as I see fit, or you know, if I have an extra second, I might come in and coil fold it. But it doesn't hurt it at all if you would now cover it back up and just leave it. And we're gonna leave it, and you can really leave this, you know, it's 1 o'clock here in the afternoon. I'm probably gonna leave this for most of the day. I might even leave it till tomorrow morning. It just depends on whether or not I get to it. That's the beauty with focaccia, is you can take a sourdough recipe, and if you accidentally leave it out on your counter and it gets really overproofed, then you can easily just make it into focaccia bread. So it's kind of the same thing that we're doing here, only we know we're making focaccia. We're not gonna be making a sourdough loaf out of this. But this is just gonna sit covered up for the next several hours. And we really want it to double in size. That's kind of the goal, is we want it to double and perk up, and then we'll put it in our pan with our butter or oil. All right, so this is out of the fridge. It's hard to tell, but it should be really jiggly. I made 2 batches yesterday, so this is a different bowl, but the bowls are a little wider, so it's hard to tell that it has doubled in size, but you can see all the fermentation bubbles on there, and I actually ended up sticking it in the fridge for a little while overnight and then bringing it back out, and it's been sitting on the counter for most of the morning. So we're gonna go ahead and do the rest of our process here. We're actually making a really fun berry compote to put in this. So we're making like a berry crumble focaccia. But again, this is the base recipe for any type of focaccia. Once you get this down and you do the fermentation, you can basically do anything you want at that point. So I'm going to show you how we whip up the berries and then how we get this into the pan. But this is what it should kind of look like once it's done its fermentation. It shouldn't be sticky at all. It should have a nice, you know, like bubbling, like it should have puffed up a little bit. And especially if this was in a smaller bowl, this would have really puffed up a lot more. So that's what you want to look for when you're doing it. And you can kind of even come in here and do another stretch and fold if you want to. But again, like it should be really nice and smooth, really nice and stretchy, and it should kind of stay in its shape when you coil fold it into the center. That's kind of what you're looking for. However, if it doesn't look like that and it is spreading out and it's really overproofed and you accidentally left it out, that's totally fine too. It's focaccia. It's supposed to be a flatter bread, so you're fine. It'll still work out. So we're gonna get this into the pan and into the oven. So we're gonna mix up our berry filling. So we're just gonna do 2 cups of berries. I'm doing blueberries and raspberries. You can do all blueberries or all raspberries, either works fine. And then we're going to come in with about a tablespoon of lemon juice, or you can do like the juice of half a lemon. And I usually do like 1 to 2 tablespoons. And then a tablespoon of raw maple sugar and a tablespoon of maple syrup. You could also use honey. I like to use natural sweeteners rather than going right for the sugar. And you may need to adjust this a little bit. You can adjust the lemon juice later, and you can add more sweetener. So we're just gonna turn this on like a medium to high heat just to kind of get it starting to simmer. So you're gonna just kind of bring this down, and as it starts to simmer, we're gonna mash in the berries just a little bit. All right, so we have it melted down here, and we're just gonna gently smash some of the raspberries up. We don't want it to be like a jam or anything. We want it to definitely be berries. And then as we bring it to a simmer, and you'll also see over here, I have some ghee on the stove that is melting. I don't like to use oils in my focaccia. I really prefer to use a melted butter or a melted ghee. It has a higher heat point and it's a healthier fat to just eat overall. So I like to stick to ghee or even tallow. You could do like a tallow on the base when you put it into the pan. So we're gonna heat that up, get that ready, and then we'll finish up our berries. All right, so we have this sizzling or simmering, I guess, at this point. And we're just gonna let it do its thing for a minute just to get a little bit thicker and just stirring it so it doesn't stick to the bottom of the pan. So I've turned my heat down to about a medium heat now, and I'm just gonna keep on stirring as it boils. So while the berries go into the fridge just to cool off a bit, we don't want to put them into the dough when they're super hot. It's okay if they're a little bit warm, but we want to cool them off a little bit. We're going to make our crumble for the top of the focaccia. Again, you can do any type of focaccia you want. I'm just showing you a really fun one for today. So we're going to go in with our flour and some natural sugar, and then we're just going to cut softened butter into the mixture here. So it's about half a cup of flour, third a cup of sugar, and a quarter to third a cup of butter. Super easy, and we're just gonna mix that up into our crumble. And you can use like a pastry cutter or a fork or a dough hook, or even just coming in with your fingers. Okay, so that's it. We're just mixing it up. You wanna be able to kind of squeeze it in your hands and then crumble it apart. So no matter what type of focaccia you're making, you're still gonna do this next part. So you're gonna take your melted ghee or butter, or if you're using an oil, and we're going to take our dough that's been sitting on the counter for quite a while at this point, and you're going to flip it over, and you're just gonna start to spread it out. And if you were not putting berries in this, we're gonna fold it up and flip it over, because top is always the top, even with focaccia. We're gonna flip it over and let it rise again, but we are adding our berries into this. So we're gonna go ahead and just kind of drizzle our berries all over this. And they're still a little bit hotter than I would like them to be, but that's okay. Okay, and then we are folding this up. So you're gonna fold it in. It's gonna be messy. Okay, and you're gonna flip it over. And you're going to let this sit. We're gonna cover it up and we're gonna let it sit and we're gonna let it rise. Again, it's not gonna fill this pan, and that's not really the purpose of this. I find when you do that, it tends to kind of out-bake the pan. So this will spread a little bit, and then when it goes into the oven, it's gonna really kind of bake out towards the edges. It may not fill the whole pan, but it's gonna bake out towards the edges of the pan. And I also have a smaller pan that we could have done this in too, so you can kind of do it either way if you want like a really big, wide or thick focaccia, or if you want a more of thinner focaccia, it's kind of up to you. But we're gonna do it like this, cover it up, let it rise for a little bit, and then we're gonna pop it into the oven. All right, so we can let this rise longer than this if we want to, but it doesn't really make a huge difference because it's going to do its thing in the oven. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a little bit more of our melted ghee, pour it on top, and then we're just going to go through and start kind of feeding it out towards the edges. And what I'm finding as I'm doing this is there's lots of blueberry on this side, not as much on this side. So that's okay, because we have lots of the berries left. You can also, at this point, you could go through and you could cover this back up and let it rise again. So it just depends on what you're looking for within your focaccia. If you want the focaccia to be really, really fluffy, you can keep rising the dough. But either way, it's gonna bake up really nice. Okay, so once we have this like this, again, this is gonna puff up in the oven. We're gonna come in with our crumble. We're gonna put our crumble all over the top of it. So if you were doing like a regular savory focaccia, you could decorate this up with like tomatoes and vegetables and herbs and spices. You could do cheese. You could do cheese in it. You could do cheese on it. There's lots of different ways that you can do focaccia. You can pretty much do it. I've done it with cookies. I've done every type of focaccia. It's just such a fun thing to play around with. So we're gonna stick this into the oven, and when we do, we're gonna stick it in just long enough so that it starts to kind of harden the crust on top. And then what you might have to do, not always, but what you might have to do is cover it for part of the bake, usually maybe like a third of the bake, only because sometimes the top can get a little bit burnt, and especially with these like crumble pieces on top, we don't really want that to happen. So you can cover it up just so the inside starts to bake nicely. And it doesn't burn the top. So another really good way of making sure that you have what's called steam and enough of it in the oven to get that nice oven spring. You can do this with your sourdough as well, but it's putting in a pan underneath and then filling it with boiling water. And then we'll do the first half of the bake with the steam and the second half without. So we'll slide that in there just like that. So here is our berry crumble focaccia out of the oven. And it obviously didn't fill the whole pan, so it has a bit of a wonky shape, but it'll taste delicious regardless. So I also made a glaze for the top, and we use this brand of powdered sugar. And I like it because it's an organic sugar and tapioca, instead of like GMO cornstarch or anything like that. So we've also made our own in the past as well, but this is a good brand if you're looking for something a little bit safer to use in your baking. And you know, it's the same with like brown sugar. Like we make our own brown sugar for that reason too, just to kind of stay away from some of the additives that are in the stuff you get at the store, especially with powdered sugar. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and we're just gonna drizzle the top. And I like to do it when it's still really hot because I kind of want it to seep down in. So just going over the top with our glaze. And it's obviously gonna spill off the side, but it just makes it really delicious. Okay, so we're gonna let that cool for a minute and then we'll cut into it. So this is just off the end, so there's not as much berry in there, but it's so good. You got the crumble, and I'll show you kind of the side of it here. So good. I would probably advise waiting until it cools a little bit more to cut into it, but it's really hard to do that, so no judgment.